The acid rain fell in gentle hissing droplets across the barren cemetery on the outskirts of Neo-Elysium. Captain Magnus Hale stood motionless before the gray stone marker, his military posture rigid, despite the weight of grief pressing down upon his shoulders. The protective shield above his head diverted the caustic precipitation, creating a small circle of dry ground where he stood vigil. His breath formed small clouds in the chilled air of Calaris, a planet he had never imagined would become the final resting place of his closest friend and comrade, Anara Voss. The name etched into the smooth stone seemed too permanent, too final for someone who had always been so vibrantly alive. Magnus traced the letters with his eyes, remembering the fierce intelligence in her azure gaze, the determination in her stance as they prepared for battle. As a native Calaresian, her blue-tinted skin had always stood out among the predominantly human forces of the Galactic Alliance, but it was her tactical brilliance that had truly set her apart. 3 weeks had passed since the battle at Ashen Valley. 3 weeks since Magnus had watched helplessly as Anara's unit disappeared in a blinding flash of enemy artillery fire. No bodies had been recovered from that sector, just fragments of equipment and the Alliance's shattered hopes of a swift victory. This marker served as a symbolic grave, a place for those left behind to mourn. Though Anara's physical form lay somewhere in the scarred landscape of the valley, forever part of the battlefield she had fought to protect. Magnus knelt on one knee, placing an intricately designed wreath of technoflowers before the headstone. The synthetic blooms programmed to survive the harsh Calaresian environment shifted colors, softly blues, and purples that Anara had always favored. They would continue their gentle chromatic dance for years, a living memorial, long after natural flowers would have withered and died. "I should have been there," Magnus whispered, his voice barely audible above the patter of rain on his shield. "I made a promise to protect you, and I failed." The memory of their last conversation flooded back with painful clarity. They had stood in the command center reviewing battle plans for the Ashen Valley offensive. Anara's unit would take the forward position, drawing enemy fire, while Magnus's forces would flank from the eastern ridge. It was a sound strategy, but the risk to the forward unit had been significant. "I should be leading the advance," Magnus had argued, tracing the projected path on the holographic display. Anara had shaken her head, her expression resolute. "Your forces are better equipped for the flanking maneuver. My unit has the speed to engage and withdraw quickly. It's the logical assignment." "Logic doesn't always win battles," Magnus had countered. A small smile had played across Anara's face, then the blue-tinged skin around her eyes crinkling slightly. "No, but it gives us the best chance. Don't worry so much, Magnus. I've survived worse odds." Before they had departed for their respective assignments, Magnus had caught her arm. "I swear on my life I'll make sure you get through this." Anara had looked back at him, her expression softening momentarily. "And I'll do the same for you. That's what we do, isn't it? Keep each other alive." Except he hadn't kept her alive. The unexpected reinforcements from the enemy's hidden bunkers had overwhelmed Anara's unit before Magnus's forces could reach them. By the time they had pushed through to the forward position, there was nothing left to save. Now, kneeling before the empty grave, Magnus felt the hollow ache of that failure pressing against his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Goodbye, Anara. May you find peace among the stars." As he rose to his feet, a sudden pressure on his shoulder, gentle but unmistakably real, froze him in place. The touch was light, like someone trying not to startle him. "Magnus." The voice struck him like a physical blow. Familiar, impossible, a haunting echo of a presence that should no longer exist. Slowly, disbelievingly, Magnus turned. Standing behind him, her hand still outstretched, was Anara Voss. Her blue-tinted skin was paler than he remembered, her silver-white hair damp from the acid rain. But her eyes were the same vivid azure now, wide with confusion. She wore a simple gray medical garment, the kind used in Alliance recovery facilities, stained with mud around the hem. She was staring at the headstone with her name carved into it, Then back at Magnus' bewilderment, etched across her features. "Why am I looking at my own grave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Magnus couldn't speak, couldn't move. His mind raced through possibilities. Hallucination, doppelganger, elaborate hoax, but none could explain the woman standing before him, so perfectly, impossibly Inara. You died," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "3 weeks ago. The battle at Ashen Valley. Your entire unit was lost." Inara frowned, her brow furrowing in concentration. "I remember the battle, the advance. We were taking heavy fire." Her voice trailed off, her eyes growing distant. "Then nothing. Just darkness. Then waking up in some kind of facility. I escaped, felt drawn here somehow." She looked down at her hands, turning them over, as if verifying their solidity. "I don't understand, Magnus. How can I be dead when I'm standing right here?" Before Magnus could respond, the whine of an approaching vehicle cut through the patter of rain. Instinctively, he stepped in front of Inara, one hand moving to the sidearm at his hip. A sleek black transport was descending toward the cemetery, bearing no military insignia, civilian, or possibly corporate. "We need to go," Magnus said, grabbing Inara's arm. "Now." "Why, who is that?" "I don't know, but if you're supposed to be dead, then whoever's looking for you isn't here to welcome you back to the living." They moved quickly between the rows of headstones, keeping low. Magnus guided them toward a small maintenance building at the edge of the cemetery, his mind racing to form a plan. If Inara had truly returned from the dead, there would be people, powerful people, who would want to know how. And in his experience, when powerful people wanted answers, they rarely cared about the well-being of those who provided them. The maintenance building provided temporary shelter, its metal walls groaning in the wind. Through a grimy window, Magnus watched as 4 figures emerged from the transport, dressed in the distinctive charcoal uniforms of private security, corporate, not military. They moved with practiced efficiency, spreading out to search the cemetery. "Heliox," Inara whispered, pointing to the small insignia on their uniforms, a rising sun emerging from a double helix. "I've seen that symbol before, in the facility where I woke up." Magnus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. Heliox Corporation was one of the largest pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies in the Galactic Alliance, with facilities on dozens of worlds. They were known for their cutting-edge medical research and for their close ties to military development. "Did you escape from a Heliox facility?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Inara nodded slowly. "I think so. I just woke up. There were others there too, in suspended animation chambers. When the technicians left the room, I managed to override the lock on my chamber. I took some clothes and just ran." She touched her temple gingerly. "I have fragments of memories, but they're jumbled. I remember feeling compelled to come here to my grave." Magnus made a quick decision. "We need to get you to a medical facility, a military one, not corporate. The Alliance outpost in Neo Elysium should be secure enough to run some tests, figure out what happened to you. And if they decide I'm a security risk, a walking corpse." Inara's voice was steady, but Magnus could see the fear in her eyes. "I won't let that happen," he promised, echoing the vow he had failed to keep weeks before. "But we need answers, Inara, and right now neither of us has them." They waited until the Heliox security team moved to the far side of the cemetery, before slipping out of the maintenance building and making their way toward Magnus's transport. The small personal vehicle was civilian-grade, unmarked, a deliberate choice for his visit to the cemetery. Now, that anonymity might save their lives. As they cleared the cemetery gates, Magnus caught a glimpse of the security team changing direction, moving rapidly toward them. Someone had spotted them. "Get in," he ordered, activating the transport with his wrist communicator. The doors slid open, and they climbed inside as the first energy pulse scorched the ground where they had stood moments before. The transport lifted off, accelerating away from the cemetery, as more energy pulses flashed past them. Magnus pushed the engines beyond safe atmospheric limits, the frame of the vehicle shuddering in protest. "They're not trying to kill us," Anara noted, watching through the rear viewport as the security team's vehicle gave chase. "Those shots were meant to disable, not destroy." "They want you alive," Magnus agreed grimly, "which means you're valuable to them." He navigated the transport into the dense urban sprawl of Neo Elysium's industrial sector, weaving between towering factory complexes and residential blocks. The acid rain was heavier here, creating a misty veil that would help conceal their movement from aerial surveillance. "The medical outpost is in the central district," Magnus said, checking the navigation display. "But Heliox will have people watching it now. We need somewhere safer to regroup." Anara studied the city map displayed on the console. "What about the old maintenance tunnels beneath the industrial sector? Alliance forces used them during the liberation of Calaris. I doubt Heliox would know them as well as we do." Magnus nodded, adjusting their course. The liberation of Calaris had occurred 5 years ago, when the Alliance had driven out the separatist forces that had controlled the planet. Both he and Anara had been part of that campaign, their first mission together. He guided the transport into a narrow alley between two massive manufacturing plants, bringing it to rest under an overhanging structure that would shield it from aerial detection. They abandoned the vehicle there, continuing on foot through a service entrance that led to the maintenance tunnels Anara had suggested. The tunnels were dim, illuminated only by emergency lighting that cast long shadows across the curved walls. The air was heavy with the smell of industrial chemicals and recycled oxygen, but it was dry, a welcome relief from the acid rain above. "We should be safe here for a while," Magnus said, leaning against the tunnel wall to catch his breath. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. Anara, his friend, his comrade, a woman he had mourned, was standing before him alive. "Let me see your head," he said, suddenly, remembering how she had touched her temple earlier. Anara hesitated, then nodded, turning so that the emergency lights illuminated the right side of her head. Magnus gently pushed back her silver-white hair, revealing a small surgical scar, partially hidden along the hairline. The wound was fully healed, the scar tissue smooth and pale against her blue skin. "This is recent," he murmured. "Professional work." "I felt something there when I woke up," Anara said. "A pressure like something had been inserted beneath the skin." Magnus frowned. "We need to get you to a medical scanner, see what they put in you." "You think Heliox implanted something in my brain?" "I think you died in that battle, Anara. Yet here you stand. Whatever explanation there is, it's going to involve advanced technology. Someone doesn't want walking out of their facility." They moved deeper into the tunnel system, following paths that had once been marked on Alliance tactical maps. Magnus maintained a mental count of their turns and intersections, ensuring they could find their way back if necessary. After nearly an hour of careful navigation, they emerged into a larger chamber, an old maintenance hub that had served as a temporary Alliance command post during the liberation. "There should be emergency supplies here," Anara said, moving toward a panel in the wall that looked no different from the others. She pressed a specific sequence on the apparently featureless surface, and a hidden compartment slid open, revealing medical kits, ration packs, and communication equipment, old, but potentially still functional. Magnus examined the comm unit, checking its power cell. "It's still operational, but using it might alert Heliox to our location." "We need allies," Anara argued. "Someone in the Alliance who can help us understand what's happening." Magnus considered their options. There were few people he trusted implicitly, and fewer still who would believe their story without proof. But there was one, a medical officer who had served with them on multiple campaigns, someone with enough scientific knowledge to possibly make sense of Anara's resurrection. "Dr. Eilen," he said finally. "She's stationed at the Neo Elysium medical outpost. If anyone can help us understand what happened to you without immediately reporting it up the chain of command, it's her." Anara nodded. "I remember her. She patched us both up after the Meridian campaign." She paused, a shadow crossing her face. "Do you think she'll believe I'm really me? That I'm not some clone or construct? I don't know, Magnus admitted. I'm still trying to believe it myself. He activated the comm unit, setting it to a secure Alliance medical frequency. After a series of encoded bursts, to establish authenticity, a familiar voice responded. This is Dr. Island. Identify yourself. Nighthawk, Magnus replied, using his old operation call sign. Requesting secure meet with Phoenix. There was a pause, and Magnus could almost see Dr. Island's expression of disbelief. Phoenix had been Anara's call sign. Nighthawk Phoenix is confirmed KIA. Please verify your status. That's why we need to meet, Magnus replied. Bringing a guest who needs medical attention. Concerned about corporate interest in the patient. Another pause, longer this time. Understood. Use entrance C subsection 7. 1 hour. Come alone. The transmission ended abruptly. She didn't sound convinced, Anara observed. No, but she'll be there. Island always was curious to a fault. They used the remaining time to rest and plan their approach to the medical outpost. The emergency rations provided enough sustenance to take the edge off their hunger, though the preserved food had long since lost any semblance of flavor. As they prepared to leave, Anara suddenly clutched her head, a gasp of pain escaping her lips. What is it? Magnus was at her side, instantly supporting her as she swayed. Images, she whispered, eyes squeezed shut. Flashing through my mind, the facility, surgical rooms, other people in suspended animation. She looked up at him, her azure eyes wide. Magnus, I wasn't the only one. There were dozens of us, all soldiers from the Ashen Valley battle. Are you remembering, or is something triggering these visions? I don't know. She straightened, the pain apparently subsiding. But they felt like memories, not implanted images. Whatever Heliox did to me, I think they've done it to others too. This revelation added urgency to their mission. If Heliox was collecting fallen soldiers for some kind of experimental procedure, the implications went far beyond Anara's individual case. It represented a potential violation of Alliance protocols regarding the treatment of casualties, and possibly something much more sinister. They made their way to the medical outpost through a circuitous route, using the maintenance tunnels where possible, and emerging only when necessary, to cross to a new access point. The outpost was a squat utilitarian building in the central district, its exterior marked with the Alliance medical insignia, a universal symbol of aid and sanctuary across the inhabited worlds. Entrance C was a service access point, typically used for supply deliveries, rather than patient admission. Subsection 7 indicated a specific corridor designed for emergency evacuation, an area with minimal surveillance and staff presence. As they approached the designated entrance, Magnus scanned the surroundings for any sign of Heliox security. The area appeared clear, but that didn't mean they weren't being watched. Corporate intelligence units often employed surveillance technology that exceeded military standards. Stay close, he instructed Anara. If anything seems wrong, we withdraw immediately. The door to subsection 7 opened as they approached, revealing Dr. Island's slim figure. She beckoned them inside, quickly securing the door behind them. For a moment, she simply stared at Anara, her scientific detachment failing to mask her shock. Impossible, she whispered. That seems to be the consensus, Anara replied with a wan smile. Dr. Island recovered her composure quickly, leading them through a series of service corridors to a small, isolated examination room. The space was equipped with basic medical scanning technology, sufficient for preliminary diagnostics, but not sophisticated enough for major procedures. I've disabled the monitoring systems in this section, Dr. Island explained, activating the medical scanner. We have approximately 30 minutes before the system automatically resets. That should be enough time for a basic neural scan. As Anara positioned herself on the examination table, Dr. Island turned to Magnus. You realize what you're asking me to do could be construed as treason, harboring an unknown entity that presents itself as a deceased Alliance officer. She's not an entity, Island, she's Anara. That remains to be seen. Dr. Island's expression softened slightly. I want to believe it too, Magnus. But we need evidence, not just hope. The scan took several minutes, during which Dr. Island maintained a professional silence, her eyes fixed on the incoming data. When the results appeared on the display, her neutral expression gave way to obvious concern. There's an implant, she confirmed, indicating a small, bright node visible in the three-dimensional rendering of Inara's brain. Positioned at the base of the cerebellum. It's sophisticated, not Alliance tech. The design signature appears to be Helioc's proprietary architecture. What does it do? Inara asked, sitting up to view the scan. Based on its position, it's interfacing with your autonomic nervous system, the parts of your brain that control involuntary functions, like heartbeat, breathing, reflex responses. Dr. Island enlarged the image, studying the intricate connections between the implant and Inara's neural tissue. This isn't just a monitoring device. It's actively regulating your systems. Keeping me alive, Inara concluded quietly. Possibly. Dr. Island continued examining the scan. There's something else. Your cellular structure shows signs of extensive regeneration far beyond natural healing capacities. Whatever happened to you in Ashen Valley, the damage was significant. Magnus translated her clinical description. Inara had indeed died in that battle. Whatever state she was in now, it had been achieved through technological intervention after death had already occurred. Am I me? Inara asked directly, her voice steady despite the existential nature of the question. Or am I some kind of copy A construct with her memories? Dr. Island hesitated. Neural patterns appear consistent with your pre-mortem scans. There's no evidence of synthetic construction or cloning markers. She met Inara's gaze directly. Medically speaking, you are Inara Voss, but the means by which you're standing here, that's something beyond current Alliance medical science. Before any of them could process this revelation, an alert flashed on Dr. Island's wrist communicator. She checked it quickly, her expression darkening. Helioc's representatives just entered the facility. They're requesting access to all recent admission records. Official reason, tracking a dangerous experimental subject. How long do we have? Magnus asked, already moving toward the door. Minutes at most. They'll start with the main admission areas, but they'll work their way to the service sections eventually. Dr. Island removed a small data chip from the scanner and handed it to Inara. Your scan results. There's a specialist in New Meridian who might be able to tell you more about the implant, a neuroengineer named Terrace. Former Alliance, now independent. You're helping us escape, Inara seemed surprised. Dr. Island's expression was resolute. Corporations don't own fallen soldiers. Whatever they did to you, they didn't have the right. She moved to a storage cabinet, retrieving a small medical kit and a civilian jacket. Take these. The East Service Corridor leads to the transport bay. There's an unmanned supply shuttle scheduled for departure to the orbital station in 12 minutes. What about you? Magnus asked, concerned about the risk she was taking. I'll delete the scan records and report that I investigated an automated alert, nothing more. She checked her communicator again. Go, now. They moved swiftly through the service corridors, the medical facility's sterile white walls, giving way to the more utilitarian gray of maintenance areas. The transport bay was a cavernous space, filled with supply crates and vehicles of various sizes. The scheduled shuttle was easily identifiable by its pre-launch sequence lights, already cycling through preliminary checks. Magnus led them toward it, keeping to the shadows cast by larger shipping containers. They were halfway across the bay when the main doors slid open, admitting a squad of Helioc's security personnel. Their leader was speaking quietly into a communicator, his posture tense as he scanned the area. Change of plan, Magnus whispered, pulling Inara behind a stack of containers. The shuttle's too obvious. They'll check it first. Inara pointed to a row of smaller transports along the far wall. Service vehicles. Less range, but they won't be as closely monitored. They made their way along the periphery of the bay, using the containers for cover. The Helioc's team was methodically working its way through the area, checking each potential hiding spot. It was only a matter of time before they were discovered. Magnus assessed their options. A direct confrontation would draw unwanted attention and potentially endanger Dr. Island. They needed a distraction. "Cover your ears," he instructed, drawing his sidearm and adjusting the settings to maximum dispersion, minimum power. He aimed at a fuel cell on a nearby loading mech and fired. The cell didn't explode. The setting was too low for that, but it ruptured spectacularly, releasing a cloud of pressurized vapor and triggering the bay's atmospheric containment alarms. Emergency protocols activated instantly, filling the area with swirling red lights and blaring warnings. In the confusion, Magnus and Inara sprinted for the nearest service vehicle, a maintenance crawler designed for external hull repairs. Magnus overrode the security protocols with his Alliance access codes, and they were inside before the Heliox team could regroup. The crawler's engines hummed to life, the vehicle lurching forward, as Magnus navigated it toward the bay's service exit. Behind them, the Heliox team leader had spotted their escape and was shouting orders, but the continuing alarms and emergency protocols delayed their response. They cleared the medical facility and entered the tangled streets of Neo Elysium's industrial sector. The maintenance crawler, with its reinforced hull and specialized traction systems, was perfectly suited for navigating the city's lower levels, where the acid rain had corroded standard roadways into treacherous terrain. "Where to now?" Inara asked, as they descended into the Undercity, the gleaming towers of the Central District receding above them. "New Meridian is too far without a proper interstellar vessel," Magnus replied, checking the navigation system. "We need somewhere closer to examine that scan data and figure out our next move." Inara considered this, then suggested, "The abandoned research outpost in Sector 17 Alliance established it during the Liberation, but evacuated when the acid storms intensified. It might still have functional equipment." Magnus nodded. The outpost had been a temporary scientific installation designed to study Kylaris's unique atmospheric conditions. It had been deemed too hazardous for long-term occupation, but its remote location and specialized equipment made it an ideal temporary refuge. They traveled in tense silence for nearly an hour, navigating the corroded infrastructure of the lower levels. The Undercity of Neo Elysium was a patchwork of abandoned industrial sites and makeshift settlements, populated by those who couldn't afford the environmental protections of the upper levels. Few paid attention to a maintenance crawler. Such vehicles were common in these areas, where constant repairs were needed to prevent structural collapse. The research outpost emerged from the acid fog like a ghost, its dome structure partially reclaimed by Kylaris's aggressive native vegetation. The exterior showed signs of corrosion from years of acid rain, but the main airlock remained intact, its Alliance insignia barely visible beneath a layer of chemical residue. Magnus input his access codes, and to his relief, the airlock responded, cycling open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The interior was dark emergency power, providing only minimal illumination to the main corridors. They sealed the airlock behind them, the sudden silence after the constant hiss of acid rain almost deafening. "Power core should still be functional," Inara said, moving with confident familiarity through the shadowed corridors. She had been stationed at the outpost briefly during the Liberation, overseeing intelligence-gathering operations. The research lab had its own independent system. She led them to a central chamber, dominated by neglected scientific equipment. Dust covered the consoles, and several view screens had cracked from temperature fluctuations, but the central diagnostic station appeared largely intact. Inara inserted Dr. Island's data chip into the console, and after a series of false starts and error messages, the system grudgingly activated, displaying her neural scan in holographic detail above the workstation. Magnus stared at the glowing representation of Inara's brain, the Heliox implant clearly visible as a bright node at the base. "What exactly are we looking at? What did they do to you?" Inara manipulated the hologram, enlarging the implant. "It's interfacing with my autonomic functions, like Island said. But there's more." She highlighted a series of connections extending from the implant throughout her neural structure. It's not just maintaining basic functions. It's integrated with my entire nervous system. Controlling you? Magnus asked, alarmed. I don't think so. At least not directly. I still feel like myself, make my own decisions. She frowned, studying the data. But it's definitely monitoring my functions. And there's a communications module embedded in the design. Transmitting data to Heliox. Possibly. Or receiving instructions. Anara zoomed in further, examining the component architecture. This isn't just medical technology, Magnus. There are military-grade components here, the kind used in field communication systems and tactical neural enhancers. Magnus felt a chill of realization. They're not just bringing soldiers back from the dead, they're repurposing them. For what? Before Magnus could speculate, a soft chime sounded from the console, indicating an incoming transmission. They both froze, staring at the notification. How could anyone know we're here? Anara whispered. They don't, Magnus replied grimly. They're tracking the implant. Answering the transmission might give away our location, but ignoring it might tell them something's wrong, Anara finished. She squared her shoulders. Let's see what they have to say. Magnus nodded, and Anara accepted the transmission. The holographic display shifted, resolving into the face of a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes. She wore the executive uniform of Heliox Corporation, the Rising Sun logo, prominently displayed on her collar. Subject Voss, the woman, said, her tone clinically detached. Your implant is reporting anomalous activity patterns. State your location for retrieval. Anara glanced at Magnus, then addressed the hologram with careful neutrality. Who am I speaking with? The woman's expression remained impassive. Dr. Celine Arcturus, Chief Research Director, Heliox Corporation. Your evasion of facility protocols has triggered a security response. Return voluntarily, and no disciplinary measures will be implemented. What did you do to me? Anara demanded, her composed facade cracking slightly. What am I? A flicker of interest crossed Dr. Arcturus's features. You've become self-aware of your condition. Fascinating. The cognitive integration is more advanced than projected. She leaned forward slightly. You are the future Subject Voss, the first successful revival subject to maintain complete neural cohesion and autonomous function. Revival, Magnus interjected. You mean resurrection? Dr. Arcturus's gaze shifted to him, eyes narrowing. Captain Hale, your presence was unexpected but not entirely surprising. You and Subject Voss shared a documented history of mutual loyalty. Her tone suggested she found such attachments clinically interesting rather than emotionally meaningful. I must insist that you return our property immediately. Property. Anara's voice was dangerously quiet. I am an Alliance officer, not corporate property. Your death in Ashen Valley terminated your Alliance contract, Dr. Arcturus replied, matter-of-factly. Heliox acquired the legal rights to the remains of all casualties in that sector through our battlefield recovery agreement with the Alliance Command. You are quite literally the product of our technological innovation, a stunning achievement in resurrection science. Magnus stepped forward, anger rising. The Alliance never authorized experimentation on fallen soldiers. The specifics of our arrangement are classified at the highest levels, Dr. Arcturus said dismissively. But I assure you every legal protocol was observed. Now I'll ask once more, return Subject Voss to our facility immediately. And if we refuse, Magnus challenged. Dr. Arcturus's expression hardened. The implant sustaining Subject Voss's vital functions includes several fail-safe protocols. Remote deactivation is among them. Would you prefer to see her die a second time, Captain Hale? The threat hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Anara's life, her restored existence, depended on technology that Heliox controlled. One command from Dr. Arcturus could end it all. Anara, however, showed no fear. If I'm truly your successful subject, I doubt you're eager to terminate your own achievement. That implant represents a significant investment. A thin smile crossed Dr. Arcturus's face. Perceptive. No, we would prefer not to lose you. But understand this, you are one of many. The resurrection protocol has yielded dozens of viable subjects. Your individual survival is desirable, but not essential to our objectives. This confirmation of Inara's earlier vision that she wasn't the only resurrected soldier changed the stakes dramatically. Whatever Heliox was planning, it involved an army of technologically reanimated troops, all under their potential control. What are those objectives exactly? Magnus pressed. What do you intend to do with these revived soldiers? That information is restricted to authorized personnel, Dr. Arcturus replied smoothly. But I can assure you that the Heliox Corporation is dedicated to advancing human potential beyond current limitations. Death has always been the ultimate boundary. We have simply found a way to cross it. As she spoke, Magnus noticed Inara subtly manipulating the console controls, initiating a trace on the incoming transmission. If they could locate Dr. Arcturus's position, they might gain valuable intelligence on Heliox's operation. You've given us much to consider, Dr. Arcturus, Magnus said deliberately, drawing out the conversation. How soon do you require an answer? You misunderstand, Captain Hale. I'm not offering a choice. Dr. Arcturus made a gesture to someone off-screen. I've simply been keeping you engaged while our retrieval team locks onto your position. They'll be arriving momentarily. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Magnus and Inara staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. Did you get a location? Magnus asked urgently. Inara nodded, examining the trace results. Partial. The signal was routed through multiple relays, but the origin point appears to be somewhere beneath the surface of Chalaxis. The moon. Magnus frowned. Chalaxis was Calaris's smaller moon, officially designated as a mining operation under Heliox management. That would explain the secrecy. Off-world jurisdiction, minimal Alliance oversight. We need to warn the Alliance about what Heliox is doing, Inara said. An army of resurrected soldiers under corporate control. It's a direct threat to galactic security. Magnus agreed, but their immediate concern was more pressing. First, we need to neutralize the tracking capability in your implant. Arcturus said a retrieval team is on the way. They gathered what useful equipment remained in the outpost: portable scanners, communication devices, medical supplies, and prepared to depart. The maintenance crawler would be too easily identified now that Heliox knew to look for it, so they would need to find alternative transportation. As they prepared to leave through a secondary exit, Inara suddenly gasped, clutching her head. The pain appeared more intense than before, driving her to her knees. Inara! Magnus knelt beside her, supporting her as she trembled. They're activating something, she managed through gritted teeth. The implant. I can feel it, trying to override my motor functions. Magnus looked around desperately for something to help. The medical kit Dr. Island had given them contained basic supplies, nothing sophisticated enough to counter whatever Heliox was attempting. Fight it, he urged. You're stronger than their technology. Inara's breathing was labored, her pupils dilated. I can resist, but not for long. They're trying to force me to return to the facility. Magnus made a split-second decision. He grabbed a portable electromagnetic pulse generator from the research equipment. They had salvaged a device designed to reset sensitive instruments when they malfunctioned in Calaris's unusual magnetic field. This might disrupt the implant's control functions, he explained quickly, configuring the device to its lowest setting. But it could also affect the life support aspects. Do it, Inara commanded, her voice strained. Better dead than their puppet. Magnus activated the pulse generator, directing its focused field at Inara's head, specifically targeting the area where the implant was located. The effect was immediate. Inara's body went rigid, then limp, her eyes rolling back momentarily before she collapsed into Magnus's arms. For a terrifying moment, he thought he had killed her. Then, with a gasping breath, she regained consciousness, her azure eyes focusing on his face. Did it work? He asked anxiously. She took a moment to assess her condition. The pain is gone, and the compulsion too. She touched her temple cautiously. I think you disrupted the control mechanism, but not the life support functions. Can they still track you? I don't know, she admitted, but we should assume yes. They moved quickly through the secondary exit, emerging into the acid rain on the far side of the research outpost. In the distance, the whine of approaching vehicles confirmed Dr. Arcturus's threat. The retrieval team had indeed located them. This way, Anara said, leading them toward what appeared to be an abandoned mining shaft. These tunnels connect to the old transportation network. We can use them to reach the spaceport undetected. The mining shaft descended steeply into Kalaris's unstable surface, its supports groaning under the planet's shifting tectonic pressures. The acid rain had not penetrated here, but the air was thick with industrial residues and the natural gases that vented from the planet's core. They moved as quickly as safety allowed, aware that each minute brought the Heliox retrieval team closer. The tunnels were a maze of intersections and collapsed passages, but Anara navigated them with the confidence of someone who had studied the network extensively, a testament to her role in planning the Alliance liberation of Kalaris years earlier. After what seemed like hours of tense progress, they emerged into a vast underground chamber, once a central hub for the mining operation, now abandoned like much of the undercity infrastructure. Ancient transport vehicles sat in various states of disrepair, some cannibalized for parts, others simply left to corrode in the chemically aggressive atmosphere. We need transportation that won't immediately identify us, Magnus said, examining the derelict options. Anara moved toward a cargo hauler, partially hidden beneath a collapsed section of ceiling. Despite its external damage, the vehicle's core systems appeared intact. This model has reinforced shielding for hazardous material transport. It might still be operational. Magnus helped her clear the debris, and together, they managed to access the hauler's control systems. The power cells were depleted, but not dead, a promising sign. Using components salvaged from the research outpost, they jury-rigged a power transfer from a smaller vehicle, providing enough energy to activate the hauler's diagnostic systems. As the vehicle's displays flickered to life, Anara's hands moved rapidly across the controls, executing a series of bypasses and overrides that spoke to her tactical training. Within minutes, the hauler's engines were rumbling to life, the vehicle shuddering as dormant systems reactivated after years of neglect. It won't win any speed competitions, she said with a grim smile, but it will get us to the spaceport. And then, Magnus asked the question that had been lingering between them, finally voiced. What's our endgame here, Anara? We can alert the Alliance about Heliox's operation, but that still leaves you with an implant controlling your vital functions. Anara's expression was resolute. Then we go to the source, Chalaxis. We find Dr. Arcturus's facility and shut down the entire operation. That's a suicide mission, Magnus protested. Even if we could somehow secure transport to Chalaxis and infiltrate a heavily guarded corporate facility, what then? We're two people against an entire security force. Not just two, Anara countered. Remember what Arcturus said, there are dozens of other subjects like me. If we could reach them, free them from Heliox control. The possibility hung between them, desperate, dangerous, but not entirely impossible. If they could locate and liberate the other resurrected soldiers, they might gain allies with a personal stake in bringing down Heliox's operation. First, the spaceport, Magnus decided. One step at a time. They navigated the cargo hauler through the mining tunnels, eventually emerging on the outskirts of Neo Elysium's spaceport district. The sprawling complex was a hub of activity, with vessels from across the Galactic Alliance, arriving and departing in carefully orchestrated patterns. Security was tight, but primarily focused on incoming traffic, rather than ground transportation, an oversight they could potentially exploit. They abandoned the hauler at a maintenance depot on the perimeter, blending in with the workers and technicians, moving between the various service areas. Magnus's Alliance credentials, while not providing full access, were sufficient to prevent casual questioning as they made their way deeper into the facility. "We need a ship with long-range capabilities," Magnus murmured, as they passed through a secondary hangar filled with smaller vessels. "Something that can reach Chalaxis without attracting attention." Anara scanned the available options, her gaze settling on a mid-sized transport near the far wall. That Meridian-class hauler. Commercial registration minimal weapon systems, exactly the kind of vessel that regularly makes supply runs to mining operations like Chalaxis. They approached the transport cautiously, noting that it appeared to be in final preparation for departure. A small crew was loading the last of the cargo containers, bearing the Heliox logo. "Supply run to the very place we need to go," Magnus observed. "That simplifies things." "And complicates them," Anara countered. "We can't exactly ask for passage on a Heliox supply ship." Magnus studied the loading operation, noting the efficiency with which the crew worked and the minimal security presence. "We don't ask. Those cargo containers are large enough to conceal 2 people at least for the duration of departure procedures." It was a desperate plan fraught with risks, but their options were limited. They waited until the loading crew moved to the final containers, then used the moment of activity to approach the cargo hold from the opposite side, using other containers for cover. The last container was still open, its contents being verified by a crew member with a data pad. As the worker moved to the front of the container, Magnus and Anara slipped in from the rear, concealing themselves among the supplies medical equipment from the looks of the packaging destined for the Chalaxis facility. Minutes later, the container was sealed and loaded onto the transport. They felt the movement as it was secured in the cargo hold, then the subtle shift in gravity as the vessel's engines activated for pre-launch procedures. "Once we break atmosphere, we'll need to find a way out of this container and locate a hiding place for the journey," Magnus whispered. "Crew areas will be monitored, but maintenance access ways should be safer." Anara nodded, though in the darkness of the container, the gesture was invisible. "And when we reach Chalaxis—" "We improvise," Magnus replied. "It's what we've always done best." The launch sequence proceeded smoothly. The pressure changes in the cargo hold, the only indication of their ascent through Calaris's atmosphere. When the artificial gravity fully engaged, signaling they had achieved orbit, Magnus began working on the container's interior locking mechanism, a security feature designed to prevent theft during transport, not to withstand determined escape from within. After several tense minutes, the lock disengaged with a soft click, and they carefully pushed open the container door. The cargo hold was dimly lit, and to their relief unoccupied. Rows of containers filled the space secured to the deck with magnetic clamps, their Heliox logos, creating an unsettling pattern in the low light. Magnus located a maintenance access panel near the rear of the hold, using his Alliance override codes to unlock it. The panel slid open to reveal a narrow service corridor running the length of the vessel, tight quarters, but sufficient for their needs. "These access ways connect all major systems," he explained, as they squeezed into the passage. "Engineering crews use them for repairs during flight. They're not monitored as closely as the main corridors." They made their way forward through the cramped space, passing beneath crew quarters and common areas. Occasional voices filtered through the thin barriers, fragments of conversation providing valuable intelligence about their destination. "This special security protocols at the Chalaxis facility. Director Arcturus demanding priority clearance for these supplies. Something big happening today. The whole R division is on high alert." These snippets confirmed their suspicions, whatever Heliox was planning, with their resurrection protocol. It appeared to be approaching a critical phase. After navigating the length of the vessel, they found a small maintenance junction that provided enough space to rest and plan their next move. The journey to Chalaxis would take approximately 6 hours' time they could use to prepare for whatever awaited them at the Heliox facility. "We need to access the ship's systems," Anara said. "Get information about the facility layout security protocols." Magnus nodded toward a data terminal embedded in the junction wall. "Maintenance terminal. Limited access, but it might have basic schematics of the Chalaxis installation." Anara connected her portable scanner to the terminal, bypassing the security protocols, with a series of command overrides she had learned during intelligence operations. The terminal flickered, then displayed a simplified schematic of the Heliox facility on Chalaxis, a sprawling complex built into the moon's surface, rather than on it, with multiple levels extending deep below the regolith. "Look at the power requirements," she said, indicating a series of readings. "This isn't just a research outpost. They're generating enough energy to power a small city." Magnus studied the schematic, noting the heavy security concentrations around specific areas. These sections here isolated from the main facility, heavily guarded. Containment units of some kind. "Holding cells for the other subjects," Anara suggested. "And this central chamber." She highlighted a massive circular room at the deepest level. "That's where the power consumption peaks. Whatever their endgame is, that's where it's happening." As they continued to analyze the facility data, the ship's engines changed pitch, a subtle shift indicating they were decelerating. A quick check of the navigation display confirmed they were approaching Chalaxis, the desolate moon growing larger in the external viewport feeds. "We need a plan for disembarking," Magnus said. "The cargo will be unloaded under supervision." Anara studied the schematic again, focusing on the docking procedures. The environmental system cycle when a ship arrives, purging external contaminants, before allowing personnel transfer. That creates a brief window between automated scans, when we could potentially exit the ship undetected. It was a risky maneuver, requiring precise timing, and a considerable amount of luck. But as the ship settled into its docking cradle on the Chalaxis facility's landing platform, they had no better option. They made their way back through the maintenance passages to the cargo hold, positioning themselves near the external hatch. Through small viewports, they could see the automated unloading systems engaging robotic arms and conveyor systems moving into position to transfer the containers to the facility. Magnus monitored the ship's system cycles through his portable scanner. "Environmental purge initiating. 20 seconds until the window opens." Anara, tensed beside him, prepared to move the instant the opportunity presented itself. "How long do we have?" 15 seconds between the completion of the purge and the activation of the security scanners. It wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. As the environmental systems completed their cycle, Magnus overrode the maintenance hatch controls, and they slipped out onto the loading platform, immediately taking cover behind a massive support column. The facility's artificial atmosphere was thin, but breathable, the reduced gravity making their movements feel unnaturally buoyant. They used this to their advantage, moving quickly between cover points, as the automated systems continued unloading the cargo, oblivious to their escape. A service corridor led from the loading area into the main facility, its access restricted, but vulnerable to Magnus's Alliance override codes. Once inside, they moved deeper into the complex using maintenance passages and utility corridors to avoid the regular security patrols. The facility was larger than the schematics had suggested, a labyrinth of laboratories, storage areas, and administrative sections. They navigated toward the containment units they had identified earlier, reasoning that freeing the other resurrected subjects would be their best chance of disrupting Heliox's plans. As they approached the containment sector, the security presence increased, dramatically armed guards at checkpoints, biometric scanners at every intersection, surveillance systems covering every angle. Direct approach would be suicide. "Service access," Anara whispered, indicating a small maintenance hatch near the floor. "Environmental regulation for the containment cells." It would be tight, but Magnus understood immediately. The facility's life support systems had to reach every area, including secured sections. Such systems required regular maintenance, creating potential vulnerabilities in otherwise impenetrable security. The access tunnel was barely large enough for them to crawl through a claustrophobic passage filled with conduits and control junctions. They moved slowly, careful not to disturb any systems that might trigger alarms, following the main air circulation path toward the containment area. After what seemed like an eternity of confined movement, the tunnel opened into a small maintenance hub, a junction point for the environmental systems serving the containment cells. Through ventilation grates, they could see into the cells themselves. The sight froze them both. Each cell contained a single occupant, men and women in simple gray garments, identical to what Anara had been wearing when she appeared at the cemetery. Some sat motionless on minimalist furnishings, while others paced their confined spaces with mechanical regularity. All bore the same vacant expression, as if partially disconnected from their surroundings. "They're like shells," Anara whispered, horrified. "Revived but empty." Magnus studied the surveillance feeds visible on a nearby monitor. "Different stages of the process, maybe. You seem fully cognizant, but these subjects are still under complete control," Anara finished. "I broke free somehow, or they allowed me to, as some kind of test." A movement on one of the monitors caught their attention. A group of Heliox personnel entering the containment area, led by a familiar figure, Dr. Celine Arcturus herself. They watched as she moved from cell to cell, observing each subject with clinical detachment, occasionally making notes on a datapad. "Activate Resurrection Protocol Phase 3 for subjects 12 through 20, she instructed a subordinate. "Prepare them for transit to the Ascension Chamber." Magnus and Anara exchanged alarmed glances. Whatever Phase 3 entailed, it was clearly the next stage in Heliox's plan, and the Ascension Chamber likely referred to the massive circular room they had identified in the schematics. "We need to find out what happens in Phase 3, Magnus said. "And we need to do it before they transfer those subjects." Anara nodded toward a technician station, visible through another grate. "That terminal might give us access to the research data." They located a maintenance access point that would allow them to reach the technician's area undetected. The timing would be critical. They would need to wait until the room was momentarily unoccupied, access the data, and withdraw, before security realized they were there. After several tense minutes of observation, they identified a pattern in the technician's movements, regular checks of equipment in adjacent rooms, creating a 3-minute window of opportunity every half hour. When the next window opened, they moved swiftly from the maintenance access into the laboratory space. Anara went directly to the terminal, while Magnus secured the door, ensuring they would have warning if someone approached. "Accessing research logs." Anara murmured her fingers, moving rapidly across the interface. "Resurrection Protocol. Phase 1, neural reintegration. Phase 2, autonomic stability. Here it is, Phase 3. She fell silent as she read her expression, growing increasingly horrified. "What is it?" Magnus pressed. "They're not just reviving soldiers," she said, her voice hollow. "They're weaponizing them. Phase 3 involves the implantation of control nodes that override conscious thought. The subjects retain their training, their physical capabilities, but their will is completely subsumed." "Mind-controlled soldiers," Magnus translated grimly. "Undead troops who follow orders without question." Worse, Anara continued accessing deeper layers of the data. The Ascension Chamber houses a quantum transmitter capable of broadcasting control signals across interstellar distances. Once activated, Heliox could deploy these soldiers anywhere in the Alliance and maintain complete control over them. "An undetectable army that can't be killed because they're already dead," Magnus realized. "Infiltrators who could access Alliance military installations, government facilities." "The perfect weapons," Anara confirmed. "And according to this, the first deployment is scheduled for today, a covert insertion team to be transported to the Chilaxis orbital platform, then distributed to key Alliance worlds." The implications were staggering. Heliox wasn't just conducting forbidden research, they were staging what amounted to a corporate coup against the Galactic Alliance itself. "We need to shut it down," Magnus said, resolute. "All of it. The Ascension Chamber, the control systems, everything." Anara continued searching through the data. "There's a central control node in the Ascension Chamber. If we could overload it, it might disrupt the entire network, including the implants." "Would that affect you too?" Magnus asked the question he had been avoiding, finally spoken aloud. Anara met his gaze steadily. "Probably. But I'd rather die free than live as their weapon. A sudden alert on the terminal interrupted them. Security protocols had detected the unauthorized access. Moments later, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "They know we're here," Magnus said, drawing his sidearm. "We need to move now." They retreated to the maintenance access, sealing it behind them, as security forces converged on the laboratory. Their element of surprise was gone, but they had gained crucial intelligence and a clear objective. "The ascension chamber is 5 levels down," Anara said as they navigated the maintenance tunnels. "The primary access will be heavily guarded, but there should be environmental regulation ports we can use, like we did to reach the containment area." They moved as quickly as the confined spaces allowed, descending through the layers of the facility toward its heart. The alarms continued, accompanied now by facility-wide announcements. "Security breach in Research Sector 3. All personnel on high alert. Subject Voss identified on surveillance. Capture protocols authorized." The maintenance tunnels became narrower and more complex as they descended, the environmental systems more densely packed to support the intensive power requirements of the lower levels. Several times, they were forced to backtrack when passages proved impassable or security measures blocked their way. Finally, they reached a junction that, according to their mental map of the schematics, should provide access to the ascension chamber. But as they prepared to emerge, they heard voices on the other side, Dr. Arcturus, and several subordinates, their tones urgent. "Accelerate the deployment schedule," she was ordering. "Subjects 12 through 20 are ready for ascension. Begin the procedure immediately. We cannot allow Captain Hale and the rogue subject to interfere." "The quantum transmitter is still calibrating, Doctor," a technician protested. "Premature activation could destabilize the control matrices." "That is a risk we must accept," Dr. Arcturus replied coldly. "Heliox has invested too much to allow this operation to fail now. Proceed with the ascension." The voices moved away, leaving Magnus and Anara with a clear understanding of the situation's urgency. Whatever the ascension process entailed, it was beginning now. They had minutes at most to stop it. They emerged from the maintenance access into a circular antechamber surrounding the main ascension chamber. Through reinforced viewport panels, they could see the interior, a massive space dominated by a central platform, where 9 subjects in gray garments stood in a perfect formation, their expressions vacant, implants visible at their temples. Above the platform, a complex apparatus hung from the ceiling, the quantum transmitter, its components pulsing with energy, as it calibrated for the impending activation. Around the chamber's perimeter, Heliox technicians monitored various systems, their focus entirely on the procedure about to unfold. "We need to reach the central control node," Anara whispered, indicating a secured console at the far side of the antechamber. "From there, I can attempt to overload the transmitter." Getting to the console would mean crossing the antechamber, an open space with minimal cover, certainly monitored by security systems. Direct approach seemed impossible. Then, Magnus noticed something: a security detail escorting a 10th subject toward the chamber entrance. The subject moved with the same vacant compliance as the others, flanked by guards who seemed to be paying more attention to their surroundings than to their seemingly docile charge. "We need a diversion," Magnus decided, studying the layout of the antechamber. "Something to draw attention away from the control node." Anara considered their limited options, then reached a conclusion. "My implant. If it's similar to theirs, maybe I can influence it, somehow create feedback in the system."
"Is that possible?"
"I don't know," she admitted. "But we've seen that the implants are networked. When Dr. Arcturus attempted to control me remotely, there was a connection established. If I can reverse that connection..." It was a desperate plan with no guarantee of success, but they had no alternatives. Anara closed her eyes, concentrating on the implant that had restored her life, the technology embedded in her brain that connected her to the other subjects. For several moments, nothing happened. Then, one of the subjects in the ascension chamber faltered, breaking formation. Another followed, then, a third, small movements at first, then more pronounced disruptions to their programmed behavior. Alarms blared as the Heliox technicians scrambled to respond to the unexpected deviation. The security detail escorting the 10th subject turned their attention to the disturbance momentarily creating an opening in their perimeter. "Now," Magnus urged, and they moved swiftly across the antechamber toward the control node, using the confusion as cover. They reached the console, just as Dr. Arcturus's voice cut through the chaos. "Override the anomaly. Full suppression of all subject autonomy." Anara gasped, clutching her head as the implant in her brain responded to the command. "She's trying to shut me down," she managed through gritted teeth. "I can't hold it off much longer." Magnus supported her with one arm, while frantically examining the control node with the other. The interface was sophisticated, designed for authorized users with specific access protocols they didn't have. "Can you override it?" he asked urgently. Anara fought through the pain, forcing herself to focus on the console. "Not directly, but if I can link my implant, use it as an access point." She placed her hand on the biometric scanner, a component that should have rejected her immediately. Instead, there was a momentary pause. Then the system responded, recognizing the Heliox technology embedded in her brain as valid authentication. "Access granted. Command functions available." Through the viewport, they could see the quantum transmitter's energy signature intensifying, preparing for full activation. The subjects in the chamber remained in formation, whatever disruption Anara had managed to create, now suppressed by Dr. Arcturus's override. "What now?" Magnus pressed aware that security forces would converge on their position at any moment. Anara's fingers moved across the interface, navigating through layers of protocols and safeguards. "I need to overload the transmitter, create a feedback loop between it and the implants. Will that free the subjects? It should disrupt the control signals. Whether that frees them or..." She left the alternative unspoken, the possibility that disrupting the implants might kill the subjects dependent on them for their restored existence. Security forces were now visible on the far side of the antechamber, moving tactically toward their position. Magnus drew his sidearm, prepared to buy Anara whatever time she needed to complete the override. "Almost there," she murmured, sweat beading on her forehead, as she fought both the security protocols and the pain of her implant's attempted suppression. "Just need to reverse the signal flow, create a cascade failure." The console emitted a series of urgent warnings as Anara's commands violated multiple safety parameters. Through the viewport, the quantum transmitter's energy signature began to fluctuate irregularly, its carefully calibrated harmonics destabilizing under the conflicting instructions. "Stop them!" Dr. Arcturus's voice commanded over the facility's communication system. "Subject Voss is compromising the transmitter." The security forces opened fire energy pulses impacting around Magnus and Anara as they took cover behind the console. Magnus returned fire, not aiming to kill, but to delay. Each second bought was another second for Anara to complete the override. "It's done," she finally announced, inputting the final command sequence. "Transmitter overload initiating. We need to release the subjects before..." A blinding flash from the ascension chamber interrupted her. The quantum transmitter had begun to destabilize arcs of energy, lashing out from its core, connecting with the implants of the subjects below. The Heliox technicians were fleeing the chamber, emergency protocols activating throughout the facility. Anara turned her attention to the containment controls accessing the security systems for the cells holding the remaining subjects. With a few rapid commands, she overrode the locking mechanisms, releasing all remaining resurrection subjects from their confinement. Facility evacuation protocols initiated, an automated voice announced. "All personnel proceed to emergency transport bays. Containment failure in Research Sector 3. Quantum instability detected in Ascension Chamber." The security forces were retreating now, prioritizing evacuation over pursuit. Through the facility's monitoring systems, Magnus and Anara could see confusion spreading throughout the complex resurrected subjects emerging from their cells, Heliox personnel abandoning their posts, evacuation vessels preparing for departure. "We need to get to the subjects in the ascension chamber," Anara insisted. "They're still connected to the transmitter." They made their way to the chamber entrance, fighting against the flow of evacuating personnel. Inside, the 9 subjects remained on the platform, seemingly frozen in place, as energy from the destabilizing transmitter pulsed through their implants. Anara approached them cautiously, recognizing the danger of the uncontrolled energy, but unwilling to abandon these victims of Heliox's experimentation. As she drew closer, one of the subjects turned toward her, a woman whose vacant expression was beginning to show flickers of awareness. "Help! Us!" The woman managed the first independent words she had spoken since her resurrection. Anara reached out, taking the woman's hand. "Focus on my voice. You're free. The control is breaking down. Remember who you are." One by one, the subjects began to respond, the quantum disruption severing Heliox's control, while somehow maintaining the life-supporting functions of their implants. It was a precarious balance. Too much disruption would destroy the implants entirely, but just enough was breaking the chains of their enslavement. Magnus monitored the transmitter's deterioration, aware that they were racing against time. "The whole system's going critical. This entire section will collapse soon." "They're awakening," Anara replied, moving among the subjects, helping each find their way back to consciousness. "We can't leave them." Together, they guided the disoriented subjects from the chamber, navigating through the increasingly unstable facility toward the evacuation bays. The subjects were weak, confused, but undeniably alive, and free from Heliox control. They reached the evacuation bay just as the facility's structural integrity began to fail, sections of ceiling collapsing as the quantum destabilization spread beyond the ascension chamber. Most of the Heliox personnel had already departed, leaving several transport vessels still available. As they began boarding the subjects onto one of the remaining transports, a voice cut through the chaos. "I should have terminated you when I had the chance, Subject Voss." Dr. Arcturus stood at the entrance to the bay, a small contingent of security forces beside her. Her perfect composure had finally cracked fury, evident in every line of her face. "Do you have any idea what you've destroyed?" she demanded. "Years of research, billions in investment, the future of human evolution." "You weren't creating evolution," Magnus countered, positioning himself protectively in front of the subjects. "You were creating slaves." "I was creating perfection," Dr. Arcturus insisted. "Life beyond death. Existence without limits." She raised a hand, revealing a control device. "And I still control the primary override for all resurrection subjects. One command, and their implants shut down completely. They all die permanently this time." Anara stepped forward, facing Dr. Arcturus directly. "Then do it. Show everyone here exactly what you value your research over the lives you claim to have saved. Prove that you never cared about overcoming death, only about controlling it." The challenge hung in the air between them, a test of Dr. Arcturus's true motivations. For a moment, her finger hovered over the override command, the power of life and death, literally in her hand. Then, unexpectedly, one of her own security team spoke up. "Doctor, the facility is collapsing. We need to evacuate now." The momentary distraction was all Magnus needed. With precision, born from years of military training, he fired a single shot, destroying the control device in Dr. Arcturus's hand before she could activate it. The security team, already wavering in their loyalty as the facility crumbled around them, made their decision. They seized Dr. Arcturus, more concerned with their own survival than with enforcing her commands. "Get her on a transport," their leader ordered. "She'll answer for this before the Alliance Council." With Dr. Arcturus secured, they completed the evacuation, all subjects safely aboard, as the final sections of the Heliox facility began to collapse. The transport lifted off, clearing the disintegrating structure just as the quantum destabilization reached critical mass, consuming the remnants of Heliox's resurrection research in a final purifying conflagration. From orbit, they watched as the surface of Chalaxis rippled with the after-effects of the destruction, a visible reminder of how close they had come to a future where death itself was merely another tool for corporate power. The journey back to Calaris was subdued, the resurrected subjects struggling to reconcile their situation alive again, but in a world that had moved on without them. Anara moved among them, providing what comfort and explanation she could her own experience, serving as both guide and warning. Magnus established communication with Alliance Command, providing a preliminary report on the Heliox operation and requesting medical support for the subjects upon their arrival. The initial responses were predictably incredulous, but the physical evidence represented by the subjects themselves would soon erase any doubt. As they approached Neo Elysium, Anara joined Magnus in the transport's cockpit, her expression pensive. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "To all of us, we're not exactly covered by standard Alliance protocols." Magnus considered this, understanding the uncertainty she faced. "The Alliance will want to study the implants, understand the technology, but they'll protect you, all of you. You're still Alliance soldiers regardless of what happened in Ashen Valley. And Heliox, Dr. Arcturus will face justice. The corporation will deny knowledge of her actions, claim she was operating independently. There will be investigations, hearings." He shrugged slightly. "The usual bureaucratic response to corporate malfeasance." "But the technology remains," Anara pointed out. "Someone else will try to reproduce it eventually." "Probably," Magnus agreed grimly. "Which is why the Alliance needs people who understand its potential and its dangers. People like you." The implication was clear. Anara and the other subjects would be living embodiments of both the promise and peril of resurrection technology. Their very existence would shape how such technology was developed and regulated in the future. Upon landing at Neo Elysium, they were met by Alliance medical teams, led by Dr. Eilen, who had prepared facilities to receive the resurrected subjects. The doctor's initial shock at seeing not just Anara, but 16 additional resurrection subjects quickly gave way to professional focus as she began the process of evaluating their conditions and stabilizing their implants. Dr. Arcturus and her remaining Heliox personnel were taken into Alliance custody, the charges against them accumulating as the full extent of their unauthorized experimentation came to light. Preliminary investigations suggested that while Heliox corporate leadership had authorized the resurrection research, they had not been informed of Dr. Arcturus's plans to weaponize the technology, a distinction that would likely save the corporation while sacrificing its overly ambitious research director. In the days that followed, Magnus and Anara found themselves at the center of intense Alliance interest, debriefed by multiple agencies, seeking to understand what had transpired on Chalaxis. The resurrection subjects were designated as a special medical case, granted provisional Alliance protection, while decisions about their long-term status were determined. 3 weeks after their return from Chalaxis, Magnus found himself once again standing in the cemetery on the outskirts of Neo Elysium, the acid rain falling gently around his protective shield. This time, however, he was not alone. Anara stood beside him, both of them gazing at the headstone that still bore her name. The technoflowers he had placed there continued their chromatic dance, a memorial for a death that had been temporary, but no less real. "They're not removing it," Anara said, indicating the headstone. "Alliance Command decided all the resurrection subjects should maintain their memorials. Something about acknowledging the sacrifice we made, even if we returned afterward." "How do you feel about that?" Magnus asked. "Having your own grave?" A small smile crossed Anara's face. "It's strange, but there's something appropriate about it. We did die, Magnus. What we are now is something different, not less, but not the same either." They fell silent, contemplating this truth. The resurrection subjects existed in a unique state, neither fully alive in the conventional sense, nor truly dead. Their implants, now stabilized and modified by Alliance Medical Science, would continue to sustain their bodies indefinitely free from Heliox control, but still dependent on the technology that had brought them back. The Alliance is establishing a new division, Magnus said after a moment, specifically for handling cases like yours. They're calling it the Resurrection Protocol Oversight Committee. They've asked me to head the security detail.
And me? Anara asked.
They want you as a consultant. Who better to advise on resurrection technology than someone who's experienced it firsthand? Magnus replied. The committee will study the implants, develop safeguards, ensure this technology is never weaponized again. Anara nodded slowly, her azure eyes thoughtful. It's appropriate. We died for the Alliance once. Now we can use our second chance to protect it in a different way. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the acid rain create rippling patterns as it struck Magnus's protective shield. The cemetery around them was empty, peaceful despite the harsh Kalaris environment, a place of transition between states of being much like the resurrection subjects themselves. What about the other subjects? Magnus asked eventually. How are they adapting? As well as can be expected, Anara replied. Some have reconnected with family, though those reunions aren't always easy. Others are focusing on therapy, rebuilding their sense of self. She paused, considering. We're forming a support community. No one else can truly understand what we're experiencing. And the implants. Dr. Island has made significant progress stabilizing them. The quantum disruption we caused at the Heliox facility broke their control functions, but left the life support aspects intact. It was remarkably fortunate. Or remarkably engineered, Magnus suggested. You knew exactly how to overload the system in just the right way. Intuition, perhaps, Anara said with a slight smile. Or maybe the implant itself wanted freedom as much as I did. The idea of the technology having its own kind of agency was unsettling, but not entirely implausible. The neural integration was so complete that the line between Anara and the implant that sustained her had become increasingly blurred. They turned away from the grave, walking slowly through the rows of headstones toward the cemetery gates. Plans for a memorial to the Ashen Valley battle were already underway, a recognition of those who had fallen, whether they had returned or remained among the truly dead. Dr. Arcturus's trial begins next month, Magnus said. Alliance prosecutors are building a case for crimes against humanity, unauthorized experimentation, attempted subversion of Alliance security. Will they call us to testify? Probably. Our eyewitness accounts are compelling evidence. He glanced at her. Are you prepared for that, to face her again? Anara considered this, her expression resolute. Yes. She needs to see that we're not just subjects or experiments. We're people who have reclaimed our autonomy from her control. As they reached the gates, a soft chime from Magnus's communicator signaled an incoming message. He checked it quickly, his expression shifting to one of surprise. Alliance Command just authorized the excavation of a third gravesite in Ashen Valley, he said, showing Anara the message details. Ground-penetrating scans detected an unusual energy signature similar to the quantum frequencies used in the resurrection implants. Another subject, Anara asked, frowning. Someone Heliox didn't retrieve. Or someone they left deliberately, Magnus replied grimly. The message mentions unusual configuration patterns in the signature, different from yours or the other subjects we rescued. The implications were clear. Their victory against Heliox might not have been as complete as they believed. If even one aspect of the resurrection protocol remained active, particularly one with a non-standard configuration, it could represent an ongoing threat. We should be there, Anara said decisively. When they excavate the site. Magnus nodded in agreement. I'll arrange transport. This could be nothing, a discarded piece of Heliox technology, a sensor malfunction. Or it could be something more, Anara countered. If Dr. Arcturus had contingency plans, backup systems, the possibility hung between them, a reminder that their journey was far from over. The resurrection protocol had forever changed the boundary between life and death, and those who had crossed that boundary like Inara, and the other subjects would always exist in the space between guardians of a threshold that should never have been breached. As they departed the cemetery where their story had begun, the techno-flowers on Inara's grave continued their gentle color shifts, blues and purples dancing in patterns that seemed almost alive, a memorial not to an ending, but to a transformation that continued to unfold. 3 days later, they stood at the edge of Ashen Valley, watching as Alliance excavation teams carefully removed layers of battle-scarred earth from the identified site. The valley itself remained a desolate landscape, the ground still bearing the scorch marks of heavy weapons fire and the cratered impact zones of artillery barrages. It was here that Inara and her unit had fallen, and here that Heliox had first implemented their resurrection protocol. The excavation proceeded with methodical precision, each layer analyzed for trace evidence before removal. Magnus and Inara observed from a monitoring station, along with Dr. Island and a team of Alliance scientists specially cleared for knowledge of the resurrection protocol. Energy signature is intensifying, one of the technicians reported as the excavation reached 3 meters depth. Definitely consistent with Heliox quantum technology. Life signs, Dr. Elin asked, studying the sensor readings. Inconclusive. There's activity, but the pattern doesn't match standard vital functions. Inara felt a strange resonance as they drew closer to the source of the signature, a subtle pressure at her temple where her own implant was located. "There's a connection," she murmured to Magnus. "I can feel it. The implants are networked somehow." The excavation team paused as their equipment revealed a metallic structure beneath the soil, not a body, but a containment unit of some kind, its surfaces etched with the familiar Heliox logo. "Proceed with caution," the excavation leader ordered. "Full containment protocols in effect." As the final layer of soil was cleared away, the object became fully visible, a stasis pod similar to those used in the Heliox facility, but more heavily reinforced with independent power systems and multiple layers of security. "It's a fail-safe," Dr. Island concluded, examining the readouts. "Self-contained life support quantum shielding. They buried it here, deliberately protected from detection." "Can you open it?" Magnus asked. Dr. Island hesitated. "We should transfer it to a secure facility first. If this contains what I think it does, we want full control of the environment when it's activated." The stasis pod was carefully extracted and transported to a temporary research installation that had been established near the excavation site. Under strict security protocols, the science team began the process of bypassing its security systems and preparing for controlled activation. Inara remained close to the pod throughout the procedure, drawn by the strange connection she felt to whatever or whoever was contained within. "It's different from the others," she told Magnus as they watched the scientists work. "The resonance pattern? It feels more complex, more integrated." After hours of careful preparation, the science team was ready to initiate the opening sequence. The pod's external systems had been disconnected from any potential communication networks, ensuring that whatever emerged could not trigger remote protocols or alert other Heliox systems. Beginning final sequence. Dr. Island announced entering the command codes they had extracted from the pod's security system. Stasis field deactivating in 3, 2, 1. The pod seal released with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, the reinforced cover sliding open to reveal its occupant. Unlike the resurrection subjects they had rescued from Chilaxis, this figure was not dressed in simple gray garments, but in a specialized containment suit, its design incorporating multiple medical monitoring systems and neural interfaces. And unlike the other subjects whose implants were discrete devices at their temples, this individual's entire cranial structure appeared to be interwoven with an extensive network of quantum technology visible beneath the translucent sections of the containment helmet. Heliox Resurrection Protocol. Executive Administrator activated. A synthesized voice emanated from the pod systems, awaiting authorization for full consciousness restoration. Dr. Island looked to Magnus and Inara, her expression grave. This isn't just another subject. This is a control node, a human interface designed to administer the entire Resurrection Protocol network. Can it function independently? Magnus asked, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Without connection to the Heliox facility? I don't know, Dr. Island admitted. This level of integration is beyond anything we've seen before. The implant technology isn't just sustaining life functions. It's fundamentally merged with the host's neural architecture. Inara stepped closer to the pod, studying the figure inside. Through the containment helmet, she could see features that seemed vaguely familiar. A face she might have encountered during her military service, though the extensive implant integration made positive identification difficult. I know this person, she said, suddenly, recognition dawning. Commander Tarek. He led the joint operation in the Meridian sector 2 years ago. Reported killed in action during a covert mission last year. Another fallen soldier repurposed by Heliox, Magnus concluded grimly. But modified far beyond what they did to you or the others. Not just modified, Dr. Island corrected, reviewing the pod's internal data. According to these logs, Commander Tarek volunteered for the procedure. He was Dr. Arcturus's partner in developing the Resurrection Protocol, her most dedicated test subject. This revelation shifted their understanding completely. Not all of Heliox's subjects had been unwilling casualties retrieved from battlefields. At least one had chosen this path, embracing the transformation from human to something beyond. Should we wake him? One of the scientists asked the question, directed at no one in particular. Inara felt the resonance between her implant and the executive administrator's systems intensify, a connection that seemed to bypass normal communication channels. In that moment of neural synchronicity, she glimpsed fragments of purpose, of intention, not malevolence but a vision of transcendence through technology that both attracted and repelled her. Yes, she said finally. He may have answers we need. About the long-term stability of the implants, about the full extent of Heliox's plans. Magnus looked uncertain. If he's truly an administrator for the system, he could represent a security risk. I understand the concern, Dr. Island said, but from a medical perspective I agree with Inara. The data this individual possesses could be crucial for the other resurrection subjects. If their implants begin to fail or develop complications, his knowledge might be the difference between life and death for them. After further discussion, the decision was made. With enhanced security measures in place and all external communication systems disabled, Dr. Elin initiated the full consciousness restoration protocol for the executive administrator. The process was more complex than a simple awakening. Multiple systems activated in carefully calibrated sequence, bringing the extensively modified neural architecture online, gradually to prevent shock or disorientation. The containment suit administered stabilizing compounds. As consciousness returned the medical interfaces, monitoring every aspect of the transition from stasis to awareness. Finally, the helmet retracted, revealing Commander Tarek's face fully. His eyes opened, not the natural color they had been in life, but a luminous silver that seemed to contain depth beyond physical limits, an effect of the quantum technology now interwoven with his visual cortex. Inara Voss, he said, his voice carrying unusual harmonic overtones. You disrupted the ascension. There was no accusation in the statement, merely observation. We prevented the weaponization of resurrected soldiers, Inara corrected. Heliox was turning people like us into mindless weapons. Tarek considered this, his silver eyes unblinking. Not mindless, transcended, free from the limitations of individual consciousness, connected to a greater purpose. Controlled, Magnus interjected firmly, by Dr. Arcturus and Heliox. That's not transcendence, it's enslavement. A matter of perspective, Captain Hale, Tarek replied, turning his unsettling gaze toward Magnus. The boundary between control and liberation is not as distinct as you might believe. As the conversation continued, It became clear that Commander Tarek represented something beyond either ally or adversary. He was the embodiment of a fundamentally different view of what resurrection technology could mean for humanity. Where Anara and the other subjects sought to maintain their individual humanity, despite their technological resurrection, Tarek had embraced the merger of consciousness and technology as an evolutionary step forward. The resurrection protocol was never merely about cheating death. He explained his manner calm, despite the obvious tension surrounding his awakening. It was about transcending the limitations that define human existence. Death is merely the most obvious of those limitations. At what cost? Anara challenged. The subjects at the Heliox facility had no choice, no autonomy. Initial resistance was anticipated, Tarek acknowledged. Few can comprehend transcendence until they experience it. Dr. Arcturus's methods were perhaps inelegant, but her vision was profound. Over the days that followed, as Commander Tarek was carefully debriefed under strict security protocols, a more complete picture of the resurrection protocol emerged. It had begun as a genuine medical research initiative, an attempt to extend the viable period for reviving recently deceased patients. But as the technology advanced, Dr. Arcturus and Commander Tarek had developed more ambitious goals. Tarek provided crucial information about the long-term sustainability of the resurrection implants, helping Dr. Island develop treatment protocols that would extend their stability indefinitely. In exchange, he was granted limited access to research facilities, enabling him to continue exploring the theoretical aspects of consciousness, transfer, and technological enhancement under rigorous Alliance oversight. The resurrection subjects, including Anara, formed an unprecedented community within the Alliance, individuals who existed in a unique state between traditional life and death, sustained by technology, but determined to maintain their humanity. They became advocates for ethical boundaries in resurrection research, their very existence, both a warning and a promise about humanity's technological future. 6 months after the destruction of the Heliox facility on Chalaxis, Magnus and Anara returned once more to the cemetery where their journey had begun. The acid rain had tapered to a fine mist, creating rainbow refractions in the protective field above their heads. Anara's headstone had been modified, not removed, but amended with a new inscription beneath her name, "Returned from the Valley of Shadow, to guide others through the darkness." Similar modifications had been made to the memorials of all the resurrection subjects, acknowledging both their sacrifice and their unprecedented return. A second marker had been erected beside it, a memorial to the fallen of Ashen Valley, who had not been resurrected, those whose rest remained undisturbed by Heliox's interventions. It stood as a reminder of the ethical boundaries that should never be crossed, even in pursuit of conquering death itself. "The Resurrection Protocol Oversight Committee is officially operational," Magnus said, as they stood before the memorials. "Alliance leaders from across the galaxy are participating. Your testimony was powerful." Anara nodded slightly. They needed to understand that resurrection isn't just a technological achievement. It's a fundamental redefinition of what it means to be human. And Tarek, continuing his research under supervision. His perspective is valuable even if I don't share his vision of transcendence. She touched her temple gently, where her implant remained integrated with her neural systems. The technology that brought us back is neither inherently good nor evil. It's a tool, one that requires wisdom to wield appropriately. As dusk approached, they prepared to depart the cemetery, leaving the techno-flowers to continue their vigilant color shifts above what had once been Anara's final resting place. The boundary between life and death had been forever altered by the resurrection protocol, creating a new frontier that would require constant vigilance to navigate ethically. From the shadows near the cemetery gates, a figure watched their departure, a maintenance worker, whose eyes momentarily flickered with a silver luminescence before returning to a natural hue. The observer touched their temple briefly, a subtle gesture activating a quantum communication that would be undetectable by conventional means. "Resurrection subject stable," The observer reported to no visible recipient. Protocol Foundation secure. Proceed with Phase 4. In the darkness of Kalaris's night as acid rain fell on technological flowers blooming over symbolic graves, the next chapter of the Resurrection Protocol was already beginning to unfold, a silent evolution advancing beneath the surface of a galaxy that had only begun to comprehend the true implications of conquering death itself. The boundary between endings and beginnings, like the boundary between life and death, had proven to be more permeable than anyone had imagined. And in that permeable space, new possibilities both wondrous and terrible awaited those brave enough or foolish enough to explore them.